If we're wanting to use Maya to write out our instanced static mesh locations for Unreal, we're going to have to write an exporter that will go through all these duplicated objects and store the location, rotation, and scale of each one in some sort of data table or spreadsheet, which Unreal could then load in, read, and instance the brick or whatever object we're wanting to instance to those locations. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is find a way of grabbing the selection, storing it in some sort of variable, looping through it, and writing out the translate, rotate, and scale values. So you could do this inside of Maya in the script editor. We're going to be doing this with Python. So you can go here and go to Windows, General Editors, Script Editor, and just create a new tab that's Python. And we can start typing our code in here. Now you could use Maya's kind of script editor here. That's totally fine. I prefer to use Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to open that up because it will highlight code a little bit better and make it just easier, readable, and nicer to look at. So I'm just going to create a new file here. It's going to be Python, and we can start coding. So first thing in Maya is you have to be able to use Maya commands from inside Python. So the very first line of code that I'm going to type, and I'm just going to make the size bigger so it's easier to see, is going to be import maya.cmds as cmds. And that's import Maya commands as cmds, which stands for commands. So if I want to use a Maya command, I could just type cmds dot and then whatever Maya command I want to access. So that's the first thing that we're going to type, so we have access to Maya's commands. The next thing is going to be import CSV. This is going to be because we're writing out a data table or a spreadsheet, and CSV is pretty much just a comma-separated values exporter. It can export files, CSV files, which are just files where data is separated by commas. So commas essentially tell the file like that's a different column. So it would store things like column 1, column 2, and so on. And that would describe like a data table or a column. So importing that CSV exporter will allow us to write out CSV files a lot easier. So the next thing we're going to do is grab the selection that we have in Maya. So we're going to create a variable called selection and do cmds, ls for list selection, generate a selection list, true. And that will store a list of all the objects we have selected in a variable called selection. Next, I'm going to make another variable called column or call, and this is going to be a list of column tables that I'm going to have. Like what data are we storing for each row in our spreadsheet? And in this case, the first row is just going to be blank or just kind of like the numbering. The next row is just going to be like an ID. It's always good to have like access to like an ID. And then TX for translate X, TY for translate Y, TZ for translate Z. And then same thing for RX for rotate X, RY for rotate Y, RZ for rotate Z, and then SX for scale X, SY for scale Y, and SZ for scale Z. Those are all our columns that we're going to write out. Then what we're going to do is create a file. So I'm going to say with open, and we're going to open a file. I'm just going to make it like maybe C drive, ISM exporter, just a folder that we'll have there. And I'll call it data.csv. So that's going to be the file that we're exporting out. And we're going to write to that file. So W for write. And then, so when I say with open, it's going to create and open up that file for writing. And I'll put this as F. So I could just write things using kind of that variable. So next I'll go down here and just I'll create a writer So I can just do writer equals CSV dot writer f writer dot write row. So we're going to write a row with all those columns. So the first row is just going to be the list of these columns. And then what we're going to do is do a loop. So for index object in enumerate, we're going to enumerate through our selection. And we'll make a variable called data that will hold the data that we're writing out. And that's me just defining it. So data equals some sort of list. And then I'll do data.append. So I'm appending data to that list. We're going to append idx for the numbering of the first row, then the index, and then data.append. I'm going to get the translate x, y, and z values. So to get those values, I'll do cmds, that accesses a Maya command. We're going to get the attribute of the object that we're currently looping through. And we're going to get the translate x value. And we're going to do the exact same thing for translate y, z. It's the very easiest to copy and paste this. And then same thing for rotate x, rotate y, rotate z. So there we go. And same thing for scale. So scale x, scale y, scale z. There we go, writing out all that data. And then finally we've appended that to this variable called data. We have to write that into the file now. So we'll do writer.write row and write out that data. And then in case we run the script again, we don't want any data left behind from this time that we ran or export things. So I'll delete all that data after we write it out. And that's pretty much the whole script, 30 lines of code. And if I take all this and I go into Maya here, I paste that all in, and we give it a try. Select all these objects here, and I open up that folder, which is currently empty, and I run this. Let's see what happens. Does it write out a file? There it is, data. And if I double click on it, I can see all that data written out. So row number, ID, translate X, Y, Z, rotate X, Y, Z, scale X, Y, Z. And there's a lot of these bricks that I have duplicated, so you can see them all written out. And you can see the table just goes down to like hundreds of entries. So there it is, a data table or a spreadsheet with all of our locations for all those instanced geometries. So now that we have an exporter, we can pretty much import this into Unreal and create in Unreal with blueprints a importer to read this file and do that work of instancing the geometry to these locations. So it's really that easy, and that's our exporter. And if you want to save this to a button in Maya, you can just select all this and drag and drop it into the toolbar and just make a little click exporter where you just click the button and it exports it to this this file. Now you probably want to change that file name, so you can always change that or add more code to this. So we'll ask you to enter a file name and then save it out. But I'll leave that up to everybody if they want to kind of add that complexity to their code and kind of build upon this. But that's really it. So now we have our exporter, which will export our positions of our objects from Maya to a spreadsheet or a data table, which then we'll be able to import into Unreal and use that to instance our instance static meshes to all these different positions.